name's Joe Eikenseer, Director of Building Lifecycle Solutions. What that really means is I get to work with everybody that does anything related to buildings inside IMAGINiT. So whether it's design, construction, facilities management, I get to work with all of that. I've been in the industry for quite some time. The pictures, well, it's pre-graybeard, but hey, we're getting there. As we're working through all of these different things and working through the idea of what is that hybrid work solution and where are we going, what are we doing, and how does this impact and what can we do to make our businesses roll better, all those types of things. One of the things I want to do in this presentation is take a minute to look backwards before we start talking about some of the new information. Because this is the third in a series of webcasts that we've done over the last roughly 18 months. And the first webcast we had was really looking at saying, hey, we're all in this holy crap, what are we doing mode? What are some things we can do to help work remote? The second webcast was getting into things that we're looking at, well, now that we've kind of sort of maybe settled into something for a remote work solution, how healthy is it? How well is it aligned with your business objectives? And then we're leading into the third in this overall series. Who knew going into it that we'd have this whole series of items in the webcast, but it is a need. We found that out, as much as we plan for whatever we can, things are going to be different. So in this next version, this part 3 in series, we're going to start off by taking a look at what did we talk about before, setting a good foundation. We're going to look into the past to see what have we been doing, what have we talked about. We'll take an idea of the present. Maybe you can consider that to be webcast number 2, more or less, and then we'll take a look into the future of saying, well, what are we planning for as we're continuing to move forward? As it says there, the idea is we've got to be able to think about what we've done in the past, not just in this webcast series, but in just life in general, if you want to go there, so that you can know what worked, what didn't work. Try not to repeat the mistakes that you made. We're always going to make mistakes, but if you can learn from the mistakes, then hey, we'll make progress. We'll take that and get to that next step. And then drawing that line from where you were to where you are, and then that as best you can identify vision of where you're going to be, there's your path. There's that bridge that'll get us to something better, hopefully, in the future. So going back into the past, our first webcast, as I had mentioned, was the idea that this whole pandemic was coming around and affecting everybody in ways that we weren't really expecting in any number of different ways. So we had talked about things like, how are you dealing with the how are you dealing with the pandemic? Are you doing everything that you can to help with remote work for your different staff and employees? As we got into the second webcast, we talked more about the business objectives. How is your remote strategy tied in with business objectives? And then how do you figure out all of the things of, am I dealing with it the right way? Am I aligned with the business objectives, or how should I be doing things different to think about things in that other way that is aligned with my boss's ideals or my boss's boss's ideals, or if you are the boss, your vision of where the business is going over the next period of time overall. Now, when we were paying attention to all of that, that second webcast had a little bit of a feeling of, hey, we're getting optimistic. The pandemic, COVID's starting to fade away. Things are coming back to normal. Delta slammed us, and our reality is we're still in a spot where remote work, hybrid work is a reality. We're in a place where the team that we're working with is not physically in the same space that you're in. And when I'm talking about that team, I'm talking about the team that is part of your company. We've almost always been in a spot where other organizations that we work with are in a different place. That's normal. But this has been our team. So we're trying to figure out, where does that go? So today's webcast, we'll dig through and do a recap of some of those things that we've talked about before, again, so we get that context of the past leading into the present to the future. But then we're also going to spend some time looking at, do your policies, do your strategies for remote work, for hybrid work, for in-person work, whatever it happens to be, but we'll focus on the remote side, promote health. Now there's the idea of physical health. There's also the idea of mental health. You could maybe call it overall well-being is going to be one of the phrases that'll be out there instead of that as a possibility. Do your solutions aid overall productivity? Are they doing things to help people out instead of just, it's a Band-Aid that we slapped on 18 months ago, and the Band-Aid is still there. Could we be doing better? Maybe yes, maybe no, but we'll be taking a look at that from an overall productivity standpoint. And do the solutions that you have help out with the idea of interpersonal communication, of building some ties? I don't know about you and your firm or where you're at, but certainly on the IMAGINiT side, we've hired people during this pandemic in places where we'd normally be meeting face-to-face for onboarding, orientation, team building, things like that, haven't happened. Not in a physical face-to-face type of environment. It's all been virtual. So are you working in environments that promote building those ties in a virtualized type of setting? So we'll take a look at that. Now, the first part of gazing back, that very first webcast we had, I'm not going to recap everything. The entire first webcast is going to be recapped in this one slide. So just keeping that in there. Now, that being said, if we're talking about some of these things and you want to maybe revisit where you are and what is our remote solution environment, and are we doing the things that we should, and how do I break it down to evaluate what those are, by all means, go back and watch that first webcast, or get in touch with us, whatever it needs to be. But go ahead and watch that first webcast, and we break all this down into a much more fine level of detail, where we're looking at a remote solution and saying it's a combination of people, process, and technology. We've got to blend all three of those things together. That's something that IMAGINiT's been promoting since the day I got to the job. Quite honestly, it's a combination of those things that allow a business to run. And from there, we take the solution that you've got, and how are you connecting your office to the home? What design applications are you using in the office at home, and how do they work across that connection? How do you collaborate using those pieces of software across your connections? And then lastly, how do we deliver on a project in a collaborative way using our design applications across the connections that we have between home and office? So we talked about all those different types of things, threw in some ideas of different pieces that were out there at that time. There was still a lot of people looking into and working through what at that time was called BIM 360 Design, is now Autodesk BIM Collaborate Pro. There were a number of different types of solutions that we were looking at. We didn't go into any product demos in there. We just started talking about the different ways that people can work, where when we're remotely working, there's two different modes that we can have things happen, where you either take the person and virtually put them next to where your data is stored, so like remote desktop solutions, or you turn around and you go the other direction and you take the data and move it to where the person is sitting physically. So things like BIM Collaborate Pro or different types of caching solutions. You could say Dropbox would be working that way, or all the different variations of software like that, where you're taking data and synchronizing it to that local spot, so that when somebody does file open on their computer, it's opening data that's sitting locally, and speed is better. So those were the types of things that we were talking about when we were defining the remote solutions with setting up the environment. We talked about in the project delivery, how are you doing red lines? At the time, I was fairly confident that somewhere somebody was at home on their home inkjet printer, 8.511 printer, and printing out a full-size drawing on a series of 8.511s, taping them together, doing red lines, taking a picture of it, and then sending it off to some of the production drafting staff. I would hope nobody's still doing that, but at those early stages, I was pretty confident somewhere somebody was doing something like that. So how do we get past that into using tools that are better and help you out with it? And if that was the definition of remote solutions and starting to break things down to evaluate where can you do better and where are you doing all right, if we take that around and say that's the past and where are we today, well, my assumption going into this is you're pretty well settled into some sort of working remotely, hybrid, whatever. It's functional. I hope it's functional. If it's not, again, let's go back and revisit some of those earlier things. Take a look at the webcast, come talk to IMAGINiT, whatever might happen to be. But hopefully everything is functional in a positive way. And we've got customers, again, that are the whole myriad of different things that are happening, whether it's, still some people using Autodesk Revit server here and there. We've got customers that are using BIM Collaborate Pro, BIM 360 Design. We've got customers that are working with remote desktops. We've got customers that are in, whether it's Citrix or just regular Windows or other third-party solutions. There's a bunch of them out there. There's a couple of places where people are using other types of caching software to enable this type of work. There's all sorts of things that people are doing. Hopefully, you're not in a Revit environment where you're doing file open across a VPN connection from your home to a file server that's in the office. It works. You could argue that it is functional, but it's not one of the optimal types of ways out there. There's probably something better somehow, some way that we could be doing. If that is what you're doing, maybe that's a good point for a conversation. AutoCAD opening across a VPN is a bit of a different beast than Revit opening across a VPN, just to be as clear as possible through there. So hopefully we're settled in. If we need to review that, let's do it. But we'll kind of wrap that up and put it to the side a little bit with the assumption that we've got a functional workflow. So then we get to the second part, and this is intentionally a very bleak screen. In the second webcast we went through a lot that was talking about how are we tying in your remote workflows to business objectives. What are your corporate objectives? And are they impacted by the idea of people working remotely? How are you progressing against those goals? We're now, depending on how your fiscal year works, maybe we'll assume you tie it up to the calendar year. So we're 9 months into your fiscal business year. How are you going? How are you progressing against those business objectives? How much has remote work impacted that? Have you adjusted any business objectives for that, or are things good? As a company, are you growing or shrinking? This one's actually probably pretty key for a lot of people, and something that we'll be expanding on as we get into the new information in this presentation, because there's a lot of upheaval in the employment world, in the building design and construction facilities management industry right now. A lot of upheaval. So what are we doing to work with that? You might not be growing or shrinking as an organization, but maybe you have open seats to fill. How is that working for you? And day to day, if we're looking at this and tying into things to business objectives, are you doing what you think you should? Are you doing what your boss thinks you should be doing? Or are you being distracted by all sorts of other things? I know that personally, that's probably the item that I personally battle the most. If we've ever had conversations, on a call like this, if we've never met face to face, you'd probably be aware that it's pretty easy for me to fall down different rabbit holes, to find something, say, ooh, that's interesting, and go chase that wherever it needs to go. That's my biggest challenge in all of these things. I can be able to measure and look and think about things and say, here's how we are progressing against the different business objectives. And usually when we haven't been making good progress, it's because I've allowed myself to become distracted by things, whatever it is, either because I just want to be a nice guy and help somebody out, or I want to do that thing and not delegate it. What am I doing that I should be versus what am I doing that I should have somebody else be doing instead of me? So take that going. What sort of business improvements could you put into your remote environment that would make your life easier? We talked about some of the different types of tools or software solutions you could put in place to help free up time from yourself, for people on your staff. We had a brief mention of things like the IMAGINiT Clarity product through there for task automation. We talked about other types of tools and utilities that maybe already exist in the software you have today that you're not taking advantage of, whether it be Revit, AutoCAD, the BIM 360 Autodesk Construction Cloud world, tools within the AEC collection. There's a lot of things in there that could be useful if we just take a moment, pause, try to peel the blinders back a little bit and evaluate what are the tools available to me now and what would make my life easier. There may not be any cost involved with that other than the soft cost of taking some time to learn that tool. So, and then the little bit of maybe a suck up policy or whatever you want to call it, but depending on where you are inside the hierarchy of your company, of all of these things, what could you do that would make your bosses, your management's life easier? Generally speaking, and it's not just you're trying to cozy up to whoever's, and senior leadership inside the company, but it's really the idea of as you go higher and higher within an organization, that person's vision gets more broad as far as the business is concerned. And if you're able to do something that makes their lives better, that probably has a positive impact on the wider company. And if we're looking at things of what makes my life easier, that is important. I don't want to dismiss that at all. But if we're looking at what makes my life better, I've got this smaller slice of the company that I'm paying attention to. But if I'm looking at and saying, well, what makes my VP of services life better? What makes the president of my company's life a little bit better? It might not be much, but if it's just a little bit of something, that probably has that wider, more dramatic impact on the company as a whole. Yeah, sure, it reflects good on you as a person. I'm not going to deny that, but it's a way to be able to think beyond the box that you might find yourself in today. So all of those things that were out there, and we were talking about the alignment, we went through and then said, great, so if you've got all this, do you have the right vision? And this is part of that alignment thing of, the whole story of, what was it, 3 blind men who were looking at it, or feeling an elephant and trying to describe what the elephant is, and each one gives a different story because they're feeling a different part of the elephant. It's because they've got their narrow vision of that animal. And as in that other analogy that I threw in there, as you go and say, well, what would my boss care about? You're starting to back up a little bit further and see more and more of the actual real picture of what's going on. So we were asking some targeted questions of, where do you see, where does your company see themselves moving in the coming weeks and months of staying hybrid or going back to the office? If you are going back to the office, what's that plan look like? How have you weathered the storm of the pandemic? Are you coming out super healthy and there's just a glut of work that you're trying to work through, or do we need to help work on some of those pipelines? What do you think your local government is doing? If we look at a state by state, even county by county basis, different regions are doing different things in response to the pandemic. And so we started asking all these questions, saying, let's plan all these things out and start to come up with a strategy based off of what we were thinking. Well, that was all well and good. And shoot, even internally, I was working on doing some of the same things. I was trying to take my own advice into context and started making plans. And what we found out is that no matter what you came through with all of these items, how accurate were you seeing things? How well did you plan out? How closely in alignment were you with federal, state, local policies regarding how you would be able to work together? No matter where you were wrong. I'll just about guarantee that there's something that you were wrong about. In my case, I was, well, a little bit further off base than some, perhaps. On the IMAGINiT side, we were working on plans for continuing on with moving toward a hybrid work environment. And we're taking a pause on that and saying, well, let's see what's happening in the US on federal government mandates. We're looking at all these different types of things, but it maybe weren't wrong per se, but the environment changed. And because the environment changed, we need to adjust accordingly and change our plans. Because that whole thing, I don't know who came up with it first, but the idea of the only constant in life is change. The only constant in business is going to be change. So things changed, and let's adjust and move forward again, just knowing that there's something different that we'll have to try for as the priorities, the environment that we're working in, all those things adjust accordingly. So changes happened, Delta happened. Federal government started putting down some different types of things, and we'll see where all of that settles in over the next coming weeks or months or however long it takes. How is that going? How's your search, if you're doing it, for new staff going? And how is that impacted by whether or not you're in a in-office, hybrid, or fully remote working environment? Are you still searching for different ways that you can do more with less? There's always the business idea of let's figure out ways that we can be more efficient, more effective, so that we can get more done with fewer resources, human resources, technical resources, time resources, resources in a very, very broad sense. It's always happening, but there are cycles when it seems to be much more emphasized than in other parts of time in business and life. So how heavy is that search for what can we do to do more with less? There have been many conversations we've had with customers where they're searching for people, having a hard time finding qualified candidates. So in the meantime, how do they try to get through this backlog of work that they have in an effective way, knowing that they are currently understaffed because they're trying to hire, doing more with less. And as I've said before, is what you thought 18 months ago or so as just a temporary Band-Aid that you slapped on for the sake of being able to work from home during a pandemic, turning out to be more of a long-term solution than anybody had ever thought of at the time. And it's functional, it works, but should it be better? So that is the whole history of a lot of things of past conversations. If we wanted to dig deeper into what's happening from a business objectives piece, go watch that second seminar, or let's have a conversation, wherever it needs to go. When we're planning on it now, I'll argue, as we're looking into the future and thinking about how do we do things that are adding to the well-being of our staff and colleagues, how do we do things that are adding to the productivity and allowing us to make connections, it's going to be within the context that I'm going to be assuming that maybe we're fully remote now, but hybrid is going to be the new normal if it's not already for you, for your firm, for wherever you are. And these stats that we have here came from a search. I found the links there at the bottom of the page, but doing a survey of goodhire.com. Some pretty stark things. They had a bunch more than just these types of stats, but these were some of the ones that were more striking to me. 2/3 of people would choose remote working over in office today. Maybe that's not surprising, but throwing the actual number to it, makes a bit of a difference. Nearly half would quit if they were forced to go back into the office. I've personally interviewed people for positions with IMAGINiT who say the reason I'm looking is that my company said we are going back to work in the office and there was no negotiation allowed. And so that person said, okay, fine, I'm out of here. It happens. There's an article and some other things that I've seen. If you do searches anywhere, if you're paying attention to news articles anywhere, stats like these are all over the place. And it's not necessarily the idea that everybody is just quitting their job and chasing down a new career or something along those lines. That is happening here and there, but it's not that it's the great resignation is one way that it's been phrased. There's an article that I read recently that called it the great reprioritization instead. People are looking at things and saying, I've been able to work at home. We've proven that we've been able to work from home in a remote or hybrid environment. And based off of that, I experienced some different things in life and I want to change around and reset some of my priorities to be able to be effective. Now, when we're talking about that and we're saying, well, we want to keep talented staff that are working with us. We want to be able to work effectively in all of these different places. Part of how we do that is paying attention to these trends, paying attention to people, paying attention to business and business health and things like that, and finding that good middle ground. Because if you find your company in a spot where there's a lot of churn, a lot of turnover, it's not going to be good for that bottom line because you're spending a lot of time and effort on hiring and ramping up and onboarding and all these things because there is this constant low-level churn happening. And the other thing that'll happen is your effectiveness goes down. So projects will be less profitable because you have newer people constantly working on things that are less familiar with how your business gets done. So there was a place, again, nothing here is any big secret, but if you go out and do some analysis of the things that are out there, some of the most common reasons that people end up leaving their jobs are these things here. They get somebody throws a bucket of money, gives them a 200% raise, and it's like, hey, yeah, I'm out of here. I've got a big old raise. There's nothing I can do about that. There may be times where somebody says, hey, I can go over here and get a little bit more money, and maybe there's a negotiation that happens, but that's financial. The technology can't really help with financial. Work from home strategies. There was at that same place, if we look at the site here that had these items, there was some stats that they pulled out that were saying that, I don't remember the percentage, but again, significant percentage of people were willing to take less money for a remote position than an in-office position. Now, there wasn't a lot of context around that number, so take that with your grain of salt. But it's something that's out there as far as priorities are concerned. The work-home balance was a big thing. If it gets too out of whack, then people are looking to make a change to be able to get that better work-home life balance. The remote work policies, what do you have, if any, for that was a big impact on whether or not people were changed. That 70-some-odd% that we saw before. You lose interest in your job. Nothing technology can do with that, except for the possibility of interpersonal communication. Maybe the losing interest in the job is because you're feeling detached from your colleagues. Possibility. And then concern about your job and organization stability. Again, technology, work from home strategies aren't going to be able to do much with that aspect of it all. But so these are the 5 top things in aggregate that are reasons that people would leave. And if we take a look at that in context of work from home or remote work or hybrid work, however you want to phrase it, we can have a 40% positive impact on keeping good colleagues with you at your company if we have a good remote work type of environment. So there's a lot that can be said about this is a good thing. This is something we need to pay attention to and focus on, not just because it allows us to be productive at work. That's nice. That is a good thing. It's not just because it helps us get a job done on time, on budget. That is a good thing. But it also has a very much larger impact on people. And if we're talking about this in the context of overall well-being, I know that's a kind of amorphous term sometimes, but if we're talking about it, physical and mental health of all these different items, that can have a significant impact on the health and happiness of our staff. So going from there, another bleak slide. I was struggling to find a good graphic to go along with this one. But the questions that we need to start asking yourself when you're talking about your remote strategy that promotes effectiveness, collaboration, and well-being of staff, ask yourself those questions. How well are we able to collaborate? Some of this drops back into the questions we were asking in the first and second webcasts. They're constant through life. Or where are the places that we can continually improve on what we're doing and how we're doing work? We started using BIM 360 design when Autodesk was providing it at no charge to customers to help work through the early stages of the pandemic. And since then, we decided we liked it enough so that we're actually investing in it now, but we only use it for the file save as option inside Revit. Well, what could we be doing more with the mobile app? What could we be doing more with markups, with setting up issues, with viewing the documents on a computer browser? All the different types of things that are part of that tool. That tool has since moved into BIM Collaborate Pro. What could we do in there to help out with clash detection? The different collaboration features, the collaborate aspect of that package that you maybe didn't have access to before. So there's all sorts of things that are parts of the tool set that you might already have at your fingertips that would make collaboration better than it is today. Does that system encourage interaction? There's a customer I was talking with last week where pretty much every job they're doing, it's one person working that job from beginning to end. They do a huge volume of projects, but they're very short. You could consider it to be like different TI jobs or things like that. It's not exactly where they are, but that's good enough for what we're talking about. But that's one person working on a job. So a collaborative system like ABC Pro might not do much to help them out with collaborating with their colleagues across the company. So at that point, we're taking a look at things like Microsoft Teams or different instant message pieces. Are you doing anything to promote virtual get-togethers? On the IMAGINiT side, my team has come together. We've got a weekly meeting. We've got a monthly meeting that is just a technical get-together of everybody on the team who's not otherwise occupied doing something else, working, teaching a customer, whatever. Everybody on a Friday once a month will get together and talk about topics. What have they been doing that's interesting? What's some sort of internal professional development topic we can work through together? What are things that I want to communicate to the team? We'll do that, and that's something. But then we were also then the process of once a quarter, we're due to get back to it again soon here. Once a quarter after that meeting, we would have virtual happy hour where we'd close that meeting off, start up a new one just so that people could leave and take care of whatever. But starting at 5 o'clock Eastern time, let everybody just relax, grab a beverage of choice, whether it's, water or soda or other, and get around and talk. We'd be talking about movies. We'd be talking about, people were talking about Dungeons and Dragons, books that they're reading, what's happened in their kids' lives, music that they like to see, what was the last concert that they went to, just general sharing of things were there. And that did a huge amount to be able to connect people. There was a connection that was made between person that was on the East Coast and person that's in Pacific time on the team that might not have happened if we weren't doing that type of virtual happy hour to encourage non-work related conversations. And we were doing it about once a quarter, which was fine, but doing something in there to encourage that connection, because making a connection with people, even if it's just like you're seeing me right now as a talking head on a screen, if we're interactive in that way, it's just going to be that much better. And it's not just you talking with your colleagues, maybe your team, if that's where you are in the organization, but what is your senior leadership doing for the same? How open is that communication that you're working through with everybody? How proactive is the communication going at all levels inside the company to build that overall well-being within the company? So, and then taking that, how does that work with clients? Imagine if we're starting up some different things where we're building up different types of communication platforms to be able to make sure that we're easily communicating with customers and sharing information that is worthwhile, or allowing the customer to communicate and share with us and schedule meetings with us in a much more fluid environment than it is by trying to figure out, okay, what's the phone number to call and whatever else is going on. Trying to make it something that people want to engage in as we're going through it all. So there's a bunch of different types of things, bunch of different types of questions to ask as you're going into your remote strategy to just evaluate what's the health, what's the quality of our strategies, of our policies that we've got going through here. And when we're talking about strategies and policies, I want to make sure that we're defining those appropriately, because the idea of policy, strategy might be things where it's the big picture idea of what we're trying to go for. Maybe it's more the carrot side of the equation of we want to accomplish X, very generic sort of phrasing here, leveraging cloud technology to be effective hybrid work. That means nothing without any details in it, but it's a strategy. It's the overall vision of the direction we're going. When we're talking about policies, that's more of the thou shalt types of things. You do fill out your time card every Friday. We do use Comic Sans in all of our documents. Whatever it might happen to be of things that must be done. Whereas a strategy is a little bit more removed. You could call it maybe strategy and tactics in some places as well. But when we're talking about these things, let's make sure we're keeping that straight, because you might have a strategy of we're going to use cloud technology to collaborate better. But then if your policy is let's make sure we hit sync to central mid-morning, lunch, mid-afternoon, end of day. That might be a policy that you have to try and make sure that the strategy of leveraging cloud stays fluid and effective, instead of somebody opening up a Revit file and not syncing to central for a week, and then they hit the button and it can't because the central file and the local copy are too far out of date. So there's things where we need to have that correct blend of strategy and policy, strategy and tactics, to ensure that we're making appropriate progress against that, and know the difference between them. Generally speaking, if we're talking about a policy of the thou shalt things, you'll want to do whatever you can. It's like defining a BIM standard or a CAD standard. Try to make sure that the standard way of doing things, the approved way of doing things, is the easiest way to get something done, because that's a way to ensure that your standard is followed. Same thing when we're talking about policies. Try to make things that you require as a fact of policy is the easy way to get something done. So it's not saying our policy is that you must be standing on a toe and hit the sync to central button with your right pinky while picking your nose with your left. I don't know, something. I'm being obviously very absurd there, but let's make sure your policies aren't troublesome, time-consuming, burdensome things. Let's try to make sure that those are just as streamlined as what you might have in your CAD and BIM standards. So from that, if we're looking at this, other factors that we want to consider when you're taking a look at your hybrid environment to make sure it's effective, promotes collaboration with customers, promotes collaboration internally, and promotes overall employee well-being, if we want to call it that, is let's make sure we've got some standardization. If your policy is that whenever we get into a conversation like this or however, that the camera is on, let's make sure that everybody knows that and is aware of it. And if the camera is on and something happens in the background, is anybody going to freak out, or is they going to recognize that, you know, I'm working from home today? I've got dogs. Right now, there's also a bark collar on that will endeavor to keep them quiet, but stuff happens. You know, deliveries come, kids are sick and wander through, stuff happens. So if you've got that policy of cameras will be on, is it with the understanding that there's a measure of grace here that says we're not all in an enclosed environment that's pristine and pure and everything else? How is that setting up? I'm big on doing everything that's possible to build trust and openness. And that does absolutely become a two-way street. If I am as open and honest as possible about anything, and I think that there are colleagues of mine and managers of mine that might argue that I've been a little bit too open or honest in a couple of times, and I would probably agree with them too. But that's the way I will personally tend to fall. But if we're honest and transparent, then people can know that they trust what we're saying. And if there's trust, then there's confidence, there's interconnectivity that comes around through there that says, if Joe says X, we know that that's going to be real. And sometimes Joe might say X that is on the fringe of what should and shouldn't be said, but that gives me some extra context into what's coming next, so I know how to react. That builds trust. And that openness is going to be a big thing, especially as we're working remote, because when we're looking at trust, that two-way street is, I as the employer trust you at home to be working and being effective. You in turn trust me that I will give you some respect for that. Now, if anybody starts breaking that trust, then we get into spots of how do we track and police what people are doing at home. And sometimes that's needed. I'm not saying that it's all rainbows and unicorns, but sometimes those types of trust but verify types of workflows are going to be needed. But trust is the first part of that, and let's do everything we can to build that trust. You might do things on your own that make trust a little bit less steady. Staff and employees, production or however, might do things that upset that apple cart a little bit. But let's try to do that as best of a two-way street as we can. As much as possible, try to standardize on your collaboration platforms. There's any number of customers that we've talked to of, where are your files? Well, they're in SharePoint, they're in Teams, which is really still SharePoint. They're in Dropbox. We've got some files that are on an FTP site still. One of our customers is using ShareFile Sync, so we got some files there. And oh yeah, we've got BIM 360, we've got some things there. And oh yeah, our file server. So right there is 8 different places that you might have files. That gets ugly, that gets difficult. So try to standardize and streamline that as best you can to make it, when we're talking about effectiveness, people know exactly where to go, how to get to the data they need to get to, and not try to remember which place does it happen to be that this stuff is. Maybe there's no way to avoid it. You're working for this client, uses an FTP site to transfer files and you have no control. That one uses ShareFile. This one uses BIM 360. This one uses Teams, whatever. Maybe there's no way to get around that, but there are tools then that we could use that would help out with the distribution, where you work where you want to, and then you use a tool to go ahead and help with sending the files to any one of those different locations on a scheduled basis when you need it to be there. If you need to talk about those, ring us up. We'll talk about it. Yes, it's called clarity. Sorry. But let's also make sure when we're doing all this, let's be fair. If you're making an exception for just people here and there, it degrades trust. Because if anybody senses the idea of unfairness, you could call it inequality. You could throw the word of it's not equitable. There's all sorts of terms that you could throw in there. I'll just say if there's a sense that it is unfair, in whatever form, real or perceived, trust degrades, people will become disconnected, disgruntled. It starts to get people thinking about, well, let me go somewhere else. And it might be just some level of an issue with that one individual. It may also be something that's indicative of a larger potential problem. So let's work through that and try to make sure that you can justify what you're doing and you're applying it fairly across the board to everybody, instead of those little exceptions here and there. So those are some of the types of things that we have, and then start grading yourself on that. How do all those things that we talked about fit into the mental health, the overall well-being of your staff? Is it, easing the stresses that we've got through here? COVID weariness is a real thing. It's out there. When we're doing different things, how well are you building in breaks so people can relax for a minute? We used to go stand up, go out, get a cup of coffee, talk to a couple people on the way, and then come back to the desk. Maybe that's not happening. Are you doing something instead, or are we just trying to cram and get things done? Do we have the right amount of time to get things done? You may not have a choice on some of them because of aforementioned staffing issues, but how are you doing? Grade yourself on that. How well do you build connections internally and with customers using all the different platforms that you have available? I know I talked about trying to streamline things as much as possible, but if necessary, is there a reason that you might invest in a different platform to start sharing things in a different way that you did before? How do you use all these things to get more done with less? Using the tools that you already have available at your fingertips, or strategically saying, here's something that if we bring it in-house will make a significant impact on us, and build out that return on investment calculation and say this costs $10,000 and we will gain back that $10,000 in overall efficiency within X months. Try to figure out how worthwhile are these things. And maybe some of those ROI calculations are a lot less tangible. Maybe it's just an overall, feeling and a generalized improvement that you can't quite define. As much as possible, try to define it, but maybe there's some places where we can't quite pull that off. But grade yourself on that and see where you can be doing better. And I'll say turn around and start leveraging things. Leverage IMAGINiT as we're doing that. We've always, or at least I've, regularly, I've had a slide like this in presentations, over a decade now, for a long, long time, where we are here to be helping you. My purpose for the team that I've got is to put our customers who engage with us into a position to be able to be successful, to be able to put you in the best possible place for success. How that happens is certainly a big old variable. We'll engage with you as little or as much as you need, but to get those things done, to be there. Maybe we're that last piece of the bridge to get between here and where you want to be in that success, however it's defined. We've been working remote in some fashion or another from the very beginning of the company, not just the pandemic, of the company. When I started with IMAGINiT in 2000, 1999, I was and am in Denver, but I had colleagues spread out all across the company, and how we worked together as a team then and how we do it now is radically different. Let's leverage each other for those things and see where we can be something that helps you out. Let's take a look and ask those questions. Everything that we talked about here for just a checkup and a conversation of how are things going? What could be better? Let's start thinking about some of these things, get some feedback of where there are those opportunities to make improvement for effectiveness, efficiency, for building connections, for overall employee well-being and satisfaction, all those different things, and get to a spot where you can start implementing any of those changes. From an IMAGINiT side, just finalizing here with you could call it just the self-promotion or whatever else. From the IMAGINiT side, we're regularly doing this with customers through what we'll call assess and advise services or strategic process reviews. We'll be doing that as we're going through this type of thing for a remote or a hybrid work checkup and saying, how are things going? How could they be better? Sometimes it's a hour-long conversation and you're good to go and you're running. Sometimes it might be something a bit more involved. Let's just start the talk and see where we can be a tool for you, is what it comes down to. Are there places? I've had a lot of conversations lately about what can we do to improve the template and the content libraries that we're working with to allow people to be more effective. What can we do because we have projects that are fairly consistent? What can we do to automate and speed up the process of setting up and doing the initial layout and assembly of those different drawings, because there is that consistency inside them. What can we, that's process automation. What can we do to help grow our business to become a better bridge between the idea of BIM and facilities management, whether you're calling it BIM for FM, whether you're calling it a digital twin, whatever term is out there, what can we do to help out with that? These are all different things that we're doing with our customers today to help out with that. Are any of these things that might be something you're interested in as a tool that we could talk about? That's really it at this point. It's just conversation. What's possible? Where are there places that might be useful to you? In addition to all the questions that you can answer on your own from coming through and listening to this webcast, either the two previous to this one, talking about different aspects of this remote hybrid work environment. With that, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time. If you